So it's been a long time in the making, but I'm finally done the Axial SCX10 Jeep Wrangler G6.
Team Baxter.
So the G6 is just another SCX10. There's not a lot different on that front. Axial is good about re-releasing SCX10s with different bodies, and this is another variation of the SCX10 with a different body. The body on this one is another Jeep licensed body, but it's a 2-door versus the 4-door that Axial previously offered. It also offers upper lights, a dovetailed rear end. What I mean by that is it kind of tapers back. And they call that a dovetail. And the rear fenders are gone on this particular model. No more rear fenders there. So that's what they've changed basically about this SCX10. But the body looks really good, and I kind of wanted this one for a while just because of the body, obviously, but it's kind of hard to justify another SCX10 purchase just for the body. But I wanted to build a Project Zero Part 2. What Project Zero wasn't. Project Zero originally was a brushless monster, and I just couldn't do what I wanted with it. So this is V2, and it's brushed. It's waterproof. It should do pretty much whatever I want to put it through. So I'm going to pop the top off and talk about the chassis for a little bit. So we got the standard C-channel frame that goes on pretty much all the SCX10s. And this is normally enforced with plastic cross braces. Instead of those plastic cross braces, I've gone ahead and purchased aluminum front bumper mounts, aluminum rear bumper mounts. The aluminum H-brace that goes under, you can see it right there. And I think that's pretty much it for the aluminum cross braces. There is supposed to be another plastic brace here to mount the battery up front, but I cannot install that due to my aluminum front bumper mount. It goes a little farther back than the stock material has you go. So I put the battery in the back, and I made provisions to compensate for the rear weight, and I'll explain about that later. I did all this to remove flex, so there's not so much plastic, and so the chassis won't flex at all. While I was beefing up the components on the chassis, I also put aluminum shock towers on there, the shock hoops, in front and rear. The body mount posts are still plastic. There's no need to put aluminum there. And I also kept the plastic bumper. And I have RC 4-wheel drive black D-rings on there, just for a little touch. Sometimes we do scale events and need a little toe access point, so I got those on there. As I said just a second ago, I put the battery in the back because I couldn't mount it up front. And so I needed a way to compensate for that rear weight, the heavy weight of the battery sitting there. So I ended up getting some knuckle weights for the front axles. Those are from Blue Monkey RC, and it's the first time I've dealt with knuckle weights. They fit okay. I'm not using the recommended wheels that they asked for, but they sit right on there. Pretty heavy, and they're pretty stealthy. You can't really see them unless somebody kind of points them out, but those are on there in order to kind of compensate for the battery being in the back, in order to kind of balance the weight out a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the rest of the front axle while I'm here. First off, mounted right up front on the axle is the Hi-Tech servo. It's a 5646 WP. This is my standard servo. I use this in pretty much all of my vehicles.
Performs great. I've had a couple problems with maybe 2 of them. Hi-Tech switches them right out. It's just a good servo. It doesn't outperform much. It doesn't underperform. It's got good.
The Hi-Tech servo is mounted with aluminum servo mounts. Got those from STRC. see them a little better from the side profile. Those are STRC, and they're screwed in with Traxxas flathead hexes. I believe those are especially for mounting servos. They have a nice flat head to hold the servo on really good. And for the horn, I've got a Racer's Edge HD horn, just because the hobby shop had that. I don't necessarily see the need for an HD horn. Metal on metal, whatever. That's a Racer's Edge HD servo horn. The G6 kit comes with aluminum links stock, so of course I went ahead and put those aluminum links on. As I'm looking at it now, I may need to move my upper link up just one hole to avoid a potential problem. I've got Axial C-hubs and knuckles. The knuckles are hidden by the Blue Monkey knuckle weights. But those are Axial aluminum knuckles sitting on there. Underneath these Axial aluminum C-hubs and knuckles is a Axial steel universal. This helps with the turning radius tremendously. You get much more turning with the universal setup than you do with the stock dog bone setup, so I always try to get the universals in there. For the hubs, I'm using STRC /4x4 front hex hubs. They're a little bit wider and they push the wheels out just a little bit, and also it gives me a little space for my knuckle weights to kind of operate a little better. So that's why I went with those. Probably not necessary for the build, but they're aluminum and gunmetal colored, so they kind of match and fall in with the project quite nicely. I'm still using the stock plastic axle housing. I don't see any need to upgrade until something happens. It's sealed pretty well with marine grease. I've got the stock gears in there, and they're greased heavily with red and tacky tractor grease. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know I use that a lot. And marine grease is anywhere where there's joints leading to the outside, kind of hold the moisture out, keep the elements out a little bit, the best that I can. So the wheels that are sitting on the axles are RC 4-wheel drive Dixie Peck wheels. I got these wheels a while back for Project Zero, and Project Zero didn't see much use just because of the format. These didn't see much action, so now I'm going to put them through the ringer. I know another guy who has the 2.2s, and he puts tremendous stress on them and they do great, so I'm going to do the same thing. Got these Pitbull Rock Beasts. I have these in the XOR on my AX10 and I love them. I typically like a very soft tire so that I can get plenty of grab. These are non-vented just because I don't see the need in them with all this plush, and if I definitely go with closed cell, vented is definitely not a necessity, so I'm going to leave it how it is. So got Rock Beast, Pitbull Rock Beast sitting on Dixie Peck wheels from RC 4-wheel drive. Move around to the rear axle. It's a lot more simple than the front axle. I have axial lockouts on the stock plastic axle housing. I've got the underdrive ring and pinion gear from Axial in the axle housing. This is a 4313, and it's all greased heavily with red and tacky and marine grease, just like the front. Of course, the same tires and wheels on the back with no weights. I don't need weights on the rear, and that's about it for the rear axle. Told you it's a lot simpler than the front axle was. So moving on to the suspension. What's holding the chassis up are 4 Wraith shocks. These have STRC bodies and caps along with the rings on them. The internal hardware is all Axial stuff. I've just changed the bodies and the caps. The retainer clip and the bottom eyelet, all of that is still axial. The shocks are held by a small zip tie right down there at the bottom. A guy I trail with told me that little trick to keep the shock retainer clip from coming off. It seems to work pretty well, so I've been doing that too on all of my new builds, trying to get that on there. That little zip tie, and then that's pretty much it for the shocks. I've got 25 in the front and 27.5 in the rear. Gives a really soft suspension, which is what I want. Not crazy articulation, but just enough what I need. I have a lot of trucks that do that 90-degree articulation, and frankly it's a lot of the time it's a little bit too much. It helps get your truck stuck, that's what it does. So kind of trying to get away from the 90-degree articulation and keep it a little less. You need space for your truck to kind of move and get around. So that's that. The suspension links, upper and lower, are all axial aluminum. On the uppers we have 91 millimeters, and on the lowers we have 98 millimeters. The lowers have stock rod ends. The uppers have a combination of longer rod ends in the rear and spacers in the front. This is in order to get the drive shafts at a better angle, but I'll talk a little bit about that later. So that's the suspension, not a whole lot to it. So now I'm getting to the transmission, and there's not a whole lot you can see, as I'm not going to take the gearbox back apart. But there's your transmission gearbox along with your spur, which is run by the motor. I have a axial aluminum gear set in there, and that's once again lubed with red and tacky. Stock spur gear, stock pinion, nothing changed there. MIP drive shafts, and on this side there is a longer hub in order to push this drive shaft past the spur gear cover. This hub has been a constant source of problems since I put this truck together. These MIP drive shafts aren't performing how they should, and that's completely because of what I've done with these race shocks. It brings the chassis up too high so that I don't have a good drive shaft angle, so it's causing the drive shafts to bind just a little bit. I've taken steps to clock the axles back, which is what I was talking about earlier with the spacers and the longer rod ends in the upper links. What that does is rotate the axle just a little bit. I don't know if you can see it there, but it's leaning back rather severely. Not a big fan of that, but that's how I've gotten this thing to work. Steadily looking for a solution for that, and I may even pull out the drive shafts at some point to put an alternative in. But for now, I've seemed to have gotten the binding out by clocking the axles, each axle just a little bit. So I'm going to give it a first run, a couple runs after that, and see how they do. If I continue to have problems, I'll be pulling them out and looking for an alternative. Or maybe even putting the stock ones back in, even though that's a very weak point. Right now, the only weak point in my drive line is the plastic spur gear, and that's intentional, so that sort of a emergency stop. If at worst case I'll strip my spur, and that's a lot easier and cheaper for me to fix than a lot of the other things that could go wrong. So you got all metal drivetrain, mostly steel drivetrain, on up into the spur gear. So now I'm going to talk about what's powering this thing. I've seen mixed reviews about this 35 turn Tiken, but I'm going to be using it in my project until it blows, and then I'll put the energy in. I've gotten extra brushes for it because it's my understanding that the Tiken brushes are very soft, probably some of the softest that have been seen. So The whole rebuildable motor thing is new to me, and this will be my first try. Pushing that Tinkin motor is a Sidewinder 3. This is another old standby, just like my servo. I use the Sidewinder 3 in a lot of my builds, probably 90% of my builds. It just works. It's waterproof. You just don't need to worry about it very much. It's a very good ESC. Can't complain about it, and it runs 10 scale perfectly. Again, I run Castle BEC, CCBEC. Run that on most of my builds, no problems. I waterproofed it with silicone a little bit just to kind of protect it from the elements. Just a bit. You can see it kind of hanging out of the ends there, and a little bit of silicone overlap. And but it works good. I've got it set to 7.4 volts for the servo to get the maximum torque out of my servo. And that's CCBC. Kind of sits there and does its job. Don't have to worry about it. I got the Axial simple LED controller, just running the front lights on this chassis. No relation to the body. And it has one more port. I could just peel the plastic dip away, and I can expand lights to the rear if I ever decide I want to put a bumper on. It's the first time I used plastic dip. It seemed to work pretty well. I plastic dipped my simple LED controller. Just a couple other things that I had some small worries about with moisture and all. Got them covered up. Everything should be fine. Really like the plastic dip. I'll be using it a lot in the future. I was kind of skeptical of it before, but kind of worked good, and I'll continue to use it. Inside the receiver box is a Spectrum waterproof receiver, 3-channel receiver. I needed a 3-channel receiver to run the extra light system and my BEC. I shortened a lot of the wires with Mini Dean's connectors. They seem to work very well. I use them pretty much anywhere I can shorten a wire, and anywhere I need to get a nice easy connect and disconnect. So now moving on to the body. Of course, it's the G6 body. It's a regular axial body with just a few changes. You've got your dovetail that I mentioned earlier. You got thinner fenders that are pre-attached. They're not attached afterwards with plastic screws and all. That kind of stinks. It takes away from the realism, but it is what it is. I chose to paint this body in 3 colors. I used Tamiya gunmetal, Tamiya black for some accents and for the grill, and I used silver for the interior. The silver was used because I could not find a color to match the interior stickers. The silver didn't match, but it turned out to be quite a nice touch. It kind of worked pretty well, and I like the way it turned out. I used stickers from the kit and from a couple of other kits that I had. I didn't go crazy with the stickers. I'm not one to sticker it all up and put sponsors and all. I put all the stickers on though, the required stickers, all the interior stickers. Put the Castle logo in there because it's powered by Castle, and I like Castle products a good bit, so anytime I can put their logo on my truck, it means it's running good, right? I put the planer steering wheel in just because it looked better on my project. Regular console stickers and all. There you can see the silver a little bit better. Gunmetal along the back. Black in the back. The cell is black. The cage went on pretty easily. Instead of using the black spacers that the manual recommends, I went out and got axial spacers and used those instead, and that seemed to turn out pretty good. I like how that worked. A few stickers on the tube. In the front, I used the light buckets that were provided to give a little little better touch of detail, and that turned out pretty well. In the back, instead of using all the stickers that the manual suggests, I actually put a spare light bucket that I had in there. That goes along with the 5 LEDs up front. Now, I wanted a way to make this light up without having that cord attached to the body, so when you yank the body off, you don't pull that cord out, because I'm that type of guy who will just yank my body off and end up screwing up something. So I devised a system to get this lit up by itself. All this runs to that switch and that battery. So when I plug this battery in, I can flick this switch and that lights up my front buckets and my rear tail lights. So I thought that was a nice touch. And just by chance, it gives it a nice little blue glow. I don't know if you can see that underneath, but it gives a nice little blue glow that casts on the ground. So that looks pretty good. So that's just about it for my G6 build. As you can see, it's all lit up. We've got the tail lights back there going. Your LEDs up top. And your little lights down at the bottom. Pretty anxious to get this one out on the trails to see how it runs. The only issues I foresee are those drive shafts, which are driving me crazy, but it's my own fault because I have the truck so high. And the phones in these tires seem to be moving around a little bit. The only way I know to do that, to fix that, is to go closed cell. So that's the Axial SCX10 Jeep Wrangler G6. Now all that's left is to get it out on the trail and see how it runs.